So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. In this series, we learned that the tree of knowledge of good and evil symbolizes the old covenant out of which came the law of God. For Paul said, "By the law is the knowledge of sin, or good and evil." And again, "I would not have known sin except through the law." John was clear. Sin is lawlessness. The law correlates with the first outcome of the principle of sowing and reaping. In 1 John 2:15 through 17, John describes all that is in the world as the desires of the flesh and eyes and pride in possessions. This correlates with the three components in the tree of knowledge. As we learned, we are creatures of desire, but when our desires come at the expense of others, we sin or miss the mark of the moral essence of God's law, failing to love them as we love ourselves. The story of Adam and Eve is the story of every man and woman, showing how pride, the inordinate love of the self, enters our hearts and minds and leads us astray. Once Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge, we're told that the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. Eating, which is necessary to our survival, equates to the choices we make that determine the consequences which follow. This is, of course, sowing and reaping. Paul describes what is meant by naked in 2 Corinthians 5, verses 1 through 4. This speaks of mortality, our temporary human existence, including the fact that the deeds done in this body are never hidden from the eyes of our Maker. The word mortality in 2 Corinthians 5:4 means liable to die, correlating with Genesis 2:17. Before they ate, we read, "And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." After they ate, their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked. In other words, they realized that no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. But this did not come to light until after they disobeyed. In other words, their disobedience opened their eyes, for knowledge alone is not wisdom. Wisdom is gained through experience. Once their eyes were opened, they were ashamed. First, knowledge of good and evil, followed by our resistance to it due to pride. Then, death. No, not the passing of the physical form, but the rise of the carnal mind. Might this be what Paul meant by dead in trespasses and sins? Might this suggest that life includes a genuine state of humility? So what did Adam and Eve do once their eyes were opened and they knew they were naked? They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. Where did they get the fig leaves? Might they have taken them from the tree of knowledge, since that is where they got the fruit? Might this suggest our attempts to cover our disobedient nature by the works of the law, which prompted Paul to state, "By works of the law, no one will be justified"? Knowing the law does not make us righteous any more than knowing a doctor makes us one. Ritual and rote, even when tied to the law, cannot change us. Our word for coverings is aprons in the King James and loincloths in the ESV. Strong's defines this word as a belt for the waist. I immediately think of the fact that this refers to the reproductive areas of both the man and woman, the source of sowing and reaping. Coincidence? I don't think so. Once they covered themselves, we're told that they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Hid themselves. How can we hide from God? We can't, but we certainly try to hide from each other, don't we? First coverings, then hiding, and all because they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, how does this translate to our present reality? First of all, and I emphasize, we must recognize that the story of Adam and Eve is a presentation of what happens to every person who enters this fleshly realm. This is why Paul wrote, "For as in, or just like Adam, all die." Secondly, the knowledge of good and evil or law is needed to regulate our behavior, which, when perceived correctly, is the core of our existence. Think about it. Don't our relationships with family, friends, and society determine our psychological and emotional structure? Now let's consider some raw and honest facts. When called good master, Jesus responded, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God." Paul, quoting from Psalm 14:53, stated, "None is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one." These statements put all of us on equal ground, do they not? They do, leaving no room for prejudice, which includes thinking we are better than someone else because of this, that, or the other, does it not? So why are we prejudiced? To cover ourselves by making ourselves appear better than those we accuse? But friend, this is never true. We are never, ever better than anyone else, regardless of color, culture, belief, or yes, even actions. This is what Jesus exemplified. Friend, Adam and Eve did not die because they ate from the tree of knowledge. They died because they used their knowledge to accuse in order to justify or hide their own disobedience. It's called blaming others. And believe me, even if an accusation is true, it still doesn't make us one whit better than anyone else or change the fact that we're guilty. James was clear. There is only one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. Who are we to judge our neighbor? In Romans 5:20, Paul states, "Now the law came in to increase the trespass." Increase the trespass? Yes, meaning that the law provokes the very thing it condemns. And believe me, when we take time to think about it, all of us get this. However, Paul didn't stop there, but followed with, "But where sin increased, grace abounded all the more." So does all of this mean that I should beat myself over the head all the time? Of course not. But it does mean we shouldn't beat someone else over the head either, regardless of their actions. Paul was clear in Romans 2:1-3 that when we pass judgment on others, we condemn ourselves. Let's face it, folks. Any of us can look good on the outside, but I think everyone agrees that it's what's on the inside that matters. Finally, what about people like Adolf Hitler or Jeffrey Dahmer? No doubt, this is one of the more difficult things for us to accept. Do we not realize that the same thing that led to their evil is the same thing that leads to our own? That though there may be degrees of darkness, it is still darkness? To set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace.